Today, Australian employment booms even as unemployment rises. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, well, latest post covering finance and property news. We have to ask the question, are the ABS stats on employment, which were released today, meaningful? Because, according to the data for July, a record share of Australians are either working or looking for a job, and about 58,000 people found work last month. The increase in employment was not enough to stop the jobless rate from rising to 4.2% last month from 4.1% in June, although that's less on a 2-decimal rounding. As the share of the working age population with a job or looking for one climbed to a record high of 67.1%. That was better than market's expectations. They were looking for a gain of around 20,000, and that also accorded with the RBA's view that the labour market is cooling, but only very gradually. So it appears to be showing it's holding up in the face of a rapidly cooling economy. That'll keep pressure on the Reserve Bank of Australia to maintain high interest rates for longer. The first question, of course, is where did all the extra workers come from? Perhaps the mega high immigration, where the influx of migrants who are relatively likely to work helps to explain the data, as well as financial pressures on local workers to grab more work and multiple jobs to try and make ends meet. There was no good analysis, of course, to split out those two factors, perhaps surprisingly or perhaps not. But we also know that multiple job holders continue to rise as a proportion of the population. Employment gains of at least 39,000 are needed each month to stop unemployment from rising. That's based on the current elevated rate of migration, assuming the participation rate stays unchanged. Last month's employment gains were driven by a 60,500 increase in full-time workers, which was only partially offset by a 2,300 fall in part-time employment. So more than 80% of people who found work over the past 6 months were finding full-time work. But perhaps there is a bit of a disconnect between the ABS data, based on very specific definitions of unemployment, and the latest jobs ad data from ANZ Indeed. The ANZ Indeed Australian Jobs Ads indicator declined 3% on the month of July. That followed a downwardly revised 2.7% month-on-month fall in June. In trend terms, the series was down 2.7% month-on-month. And while ANZ Indeed job ads have fallen 28.6% from its peak in November 2022, the series is still 13.3% above pre-pandemic levels. ANZ economist Madeline Dunk said that ANZ Indeed Australian job ads recorded its 6th consecutive monthly decline in July, with the series down 16.7% since January. This points to continued cooling in the labour market. We also have seen the share of employers recruiting fall sharply in June to levels last seen during the East Coast 2021 lockdowns, while average hours worked per employed person declined 30 minutes a week since February 2023. So taken together, there is a risk the labour market could slow more rapidly than we and the Reserve Bank of Australia are forecasting. Indeed, senior economist Callum Pickering said in July the decline in ANZ Indeed job ads was once again concentrated in Victoria and New South Wales. Falls in other states were more modest. The nation's two most populous states account for around 86% of the total decline in job ads over the past year. Recent declines in job ads have reflected reduced demand in education, food preparation and service, and nursing. Over the past 3 months, job ads have fallen for 57% of the occupational categories. Among those bucking the national trends, with job ads rising, have been physicians and surgeons, and in banking and finance. The rapid rise in the size of the workforce has caused the unemployment rate to rise from a multi-decade low of 3.5% in 2022, even though the share of existing workers losing their jobs stand at near record lows. And while the jobless rate has risen, RBA Governor Michelle Bullock has effectively ruled out reducing interest rates this year amid ongoing concerns about the enduring strength of domestic inflationary pressures. AMP Deputy Chief Economist Diana Messiah said the data showed that the labour market was still strong enough to absorb a large number of workers looking for jobs. This makes the rise in the unemployment rate less of a red flag and is not a sign that the RBA needs to imminently cut interest rates, she said. And BetaShares Chief Economist David Bezanes said that the combination of strong jobs growth but a rising unemployment rate was consistent with the RBA remaining firmly on hold for some time. The RBA won't lose too much sleep over this outcome. Indeed, it's precisely what the bank wants to see, as it considers the unemployment rate too low to be consistent with low and sustainable inflation over time, he said. The good news for the economy, at least, is that the RBA's desired rise in the unemployment rate is not coming via sharp reductions in employment, but rather strong growth in labour supply relative to softer but still firmly growing labour demand. Data on the mix of jobs shows that private sector activity slowed. The state and federal governments actually were responsible for a disproportionate share of job creation over the past year. Of the 360,000 people who found work in the 12 months to May 2024, almost half were employed in publicly financed industries like health, education, and government administration. Private sector employers, by contrast, have gradually eased back on hiring workers. Just 39% of employers were either recruiting or had recruited in June, which was the lowest figure since the COVID-19 lockdown in September 2021. That's according to data from Jobs and Skills Australia. Now, it's also worth noting that wages growth is still relatively strong, especially in the public sector, though some private sector employers seem to be cramping down now on inflation-busting awards. But the ABS reported that the average weekly earnings growth over the 6 months to May 2024 was 1.8%. That's around 2/3 of the 2.8% growth that we saw over the 6 months to November 2023. The RBA expects the pullback in hiring to cause the jobless rate to gradually drift higher as entrants to the workforce struggle to find work quickly. And Treasury expects the jobless rate to hit 4.5% by the middle of next year as the economy slows. That's according to projections back in the May budget. Before we dive into the detail of the ABS series, we should note that the outgoing sample had a lower unemployment and participation rate than the incoming group. That's enough to move the numbers around, so perhaps it's largely more number wanging. Anyway, the ABS said that the season-adjusted unemployment rate rose 0.1 percentage point to 4.2% in July. The unemployment rate rose to 4.2% in July, with the number of unemployed growing by 24,000 people and employed by around 58,000 people. This combined increase lifted the participation rate to a record high of 67.1%. The employment to population ratio rose by 0.1 percentage point to 64.3%, indicating employment growth was faster than population growth and was just below the historical high of 64.4% in November 2023. Although the employment rate increased by 0.1 percentage point in each of the past 2 months, the record high participation rate and near record high employment to population ratio shows that there continues to be a high number of people in jobs and looking for and finding jobs. While unemployment increased to 637,000 people in July, the highest it's been since November 2021, it remains around 70,000 people below its pre-pandemic level. And the unemployment rate of 4.2% was also the highest since November 2021, but was 1 percentage point lower than in March 2020. Season-adjusted monthly hours work rose by 0.4%, in line with the 0.4% increase in employment. And in July, the proportion of employed people who worked reduced hours due to illness was 4.2%, similar to what we saw in May and June. This continues to remain higher than the 5-year pre-pandemic July average of 3.6%. However, we also continue to see this balance by slightly lower than usual reporting of some other reasons that people worked less hours than usual, such as people taking annual leave. The growth in hours worked contributed to a 0.1 percentage point fall in the underemployment rate, down to 6.3% in July. That was 0.1 percentage points lower than July last year and 2.4 percentage points lower than March 2020. The underutilization rate, which combines the unemployment and underemployment rates, rose slightly to 10.6%, and that was 0.3 percentage points higher than July 2023 and 3.4 percentage points lower than March 2020. So the employment and participation measures remain historically high, while underemployment and unemployment measures remain historically low compared with what we saw before the pandemic. This suggests the labour market remains quite tight, the ABS said. And across the states, Victoria had the highest unemployment rate of 4.6% in season-adjusted terms, and Western Australia, on the other hand, had the lowest at 3.7%, reflecting the very different economic stories across the states. The participation rate was highest in the NT and the ACT at 73.6% and 72.9% respectively, and lowest in Tasmania at 60.3%. So standing back, 3 quick points. Firstly, the ABS data moves around quite a lot, so you need a truckload of salt when you see the data. Secondly, clearly, the growth in employment and jobs continues thanks to high migration and also the need for more people to work more hours and more jobs. That's a signal, of course, that the economy is doing less well under the hood. And thirdly, and I think very importantly, the distribution across the states is getting more and more extreme. Victoria looks like a basket case on many measures, whilst Western Australia is booming, at least for now. But in Western Australia, the question now is whether they will maintain their economic dynamo status or whether, in fact, the mining sector comes off the boil because of reduced demand, in which case the unemployment rate could rise there too. But the bottom line is nothing here that suggests the RBA should cut quicker than they were planning to, and the rates are very much tracking in line with their current modelling. Now, if you're buying your home in Sydney's contentious market, you don't need to stand alone. This is the time you need to have Edwin Almeida from Ribbon Property Consultants standing alongside you. Buying a property is both challenging and adversarial. The vendor has a professional on their side. Emotions run high, price discovery and price transparency are hard to find, and then there's the wasted time and financial investments that you make. Edwin understands your needs, so why not engage a licensed professional to stand alongside you? With RPC, you know you have experience, knowledge, and master negotiators looking after your best interests. So shoot Ribbon an email at info@ribbonproperty.com.au, and if you use the promo code DFAWTW/Martin, you can get a 10% discount offer. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.